I am so intensely locked into this war. This actually might be my favorite war to talk about, believe it or not, even more so than World War II, and I'm not even really sure why. Here's the thing, when I look at this video, it makes so much sense why things played out the way they played out. It all makes sense, in fact. It's like, oh, no wonder. Of course this was going to be the only war America ever lost. And it all makes sense now, but let's go ahead and rewind that a bit. It's 1959. Strength, obviously the North Vietnamese up here with this the single star. This is the South Vietnamese flag. I talk about here in Southern California. You can find this Southern Vietnamese flag all over the place because obviously if you're Vietnamese living in the U.S., you are from South Vietnam, more than likely. Not always. That's not always the case. Actually, one of my best friends is Vietnamese. This is one thing I'll never forget. He talks about how, and this is a little bit of backstory about what's going on here. He explains the way he speaks Vietnamese. He says he speaks it. He feels like he speaks it like a poor Southern farmer that comes from poverty. Meanwhile, when he hears the North Vietnamese, it's so distinct. It's so different. He says it feels more like Chinese, which makes sense because obviously it's right there next to China. More rich, more aristocratic. Those are all his words. I always remember that. I always think about that whenever I see, there's a really interesting breakdown geographically in the nation of Vietnam. You can actually associate it a lot with a country all the way on the other side of the world, that's Italy. If you look at any breakdown of Italy, the north of Italy is all the economic power. The south of Italy, not so much. That's a very similar situation. Obviously, Vietnam is not a peninsula per se. The borders look like a peninsula, but they're not surrounded by water. But South Vietnam is a bit not as rich as the core up here. This is North Vietnam. I mean, they're just next to a much bigger trading partner throughout their history, too. I mean, this is the origin of Dai Viet. Sometimes these lands in the south got passed around with some of the other empires historically. But, all right, so let's back this up right here. Strength-wise, the South Vietnamese actually have a bit of an advantage. Look at that. And meanwhile, the casualties are still racking up by the year 1960. The thing is, it was there's going to be a lot of things that happen in this video. I'm going to try to explain as much as possible. Right now, the U.S. is not there. Right now, the French are like, yo, I don't even want to deal with this right now. Like, U.S., you can handle this. The French are kind of all about decolonization at this point. Interesting that, look at this, the South Vietnamese had more soldiers, more strength, but they were taking more casualties at the same time. So here's one of the reasons why it's really obvious that we're going to lose this war, that the Americans should have never, ever, ever, ever thought they were going to win this. Look at where the communist side is. It is right next to one of the biggest communist nations, China. China just went communist about 11 years earlier, or, 10 years earlier, whenever the Chinese Civil War ends. Not only that, but you also have the USSR above China. Of course, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were going to get way more support. Meanwhile, the U.S. has to go physically all around on the other side of the globe. This is crazy. This is crazy. I get the idea, the whole idea of the domino effect here, and I get their policy of the domino effect, but of course they weren't going to win this. I mean, even if they think that the Vietnamese are just a bunch of rice farmers, which, funny enough, the Vietnamese associated themselves quite similarly to the way the Americans were a bunch of farmers that defeated the greatest empire on earth, the British Empire at the time. That was the same thing that happened in Vietnam. The Vietnam was a bunch of rice farmers that defeated the greatest empire of all time at that point. That was the American Empire. So at first, there's lots of Ho Chi Minh at first really liked really liked America, supposedly. Remember, Ho Chi Minh is a man who studies, I believe, in Paris because of obviously his close association with the French at that time. Ho Chi Minh's definitely going to come up in this video here. Again, the South Vietnamese taking heavy casualties. So right now, throughout this decade, you're going to see American involvement ramp up and ramp up and ramp up. So you have to also keep in mind all the other things that are happening in this world. So what happens in 1961? We're going to have the Cuban Missile Crisis. Things are actually going to tamper a bit in the Cold War because we literally almost just ended the entire Earth. However, the proxy wars and these little minor wars, that is really going to begin to spike. Because after the 50s and 61 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, well, the proxy wars were still kind of there, but then it was like, oh, we need to invest more heavily in these proxy wars, these little mini wars all around the world during the Cold War, because we definitely cannot let a war break out strictly between the USA and the Soviet Union, because that is how nuclear apocalypse occurs. So the North Vietnamese moving into Laos, spoiler alert, this entire region goes communist. Isn't that crazy? From Vietnam to Laos to Cambodia, the entire region collapses. And again, that's not that surprising once you actually watch this video all the way through. So 1961, JFK's in power. You're going to see the North Vietnamese. And, okay, so I just kind of went over the South Vietnamese and the thing that's going on in their world, in the Western aligned world. What's happening in the North here is very interesting in the communist world, because we're starting to see the Sino-Soviet split. We're seeing the ideas of the Soviet regime kind of differ from Mao a lot, and they're going to kind of want to do their own thing. They're geographical rivals. You got to remember that. They both have historically fought against each other a little bit, competed against each other a little bit. So weirdly, there's a lot of reports that say that Sino-Soviet split actually helped the North Vietnamese a ton, because both sides, both China and the USSR, were competing to see who could give more resources and more stuff to the communists in North Vietnam. You would think that would actually deter the conflict. You would think that would actually hurt the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese. It did not. It did not. Here are some communist Laotians that are rising up. Here's JFK. So JFK is not going to be around for much longer. He is about to get slimed in the streets of Dallas. Again, South Vietnam with much more support. But we do have, obviously, communist uprisings in the city, or surrounding the city that is currently known as Saigon at the moment. Something I always think about, especially right now as we live in chaotic times, and everyone talks about these chaotic times, is here's the thing for me. I always look back at like history. That's my channel here. I always look back at. I feel like every generation, for the most part, has had some sort of chaotic event that they've had to deal with. And I will say right now, the Vietnam War is certainly not something that I would want my generation to deal with, because you're seeing your friends get sent off to war. As a young person, and your friends are literally dying one by one by one by one. Or if they're not dying, I mean, their soul is dying. They come back absolutely, with PTSD, or obviously without a limb, or even worse. Who knows? I mean, you're seeing this happening on the daily. If you went through high school at this time, I mean, it's an insane thing that they had to go through here. It's not a crisis that I would wish on my generation. Every generation has their own crisis to overcome. This one seems tough. Oh man, look at that. They're marching across the beaches like that, throwing a grenade. So boom, they've already surrounded Saigon, it looks like. And more and more North Vietnamese forces are coming on down. So the Gulf of Tonkin incident is going to pull American boots into fighting for South Vietnam here. Basically, the entire region. See, obviously it's called the Vietnam War, but everyone gets pulled into it. Like, everyone's massively affected by this conflict. I was in Hong Kong last year, or just a couple months ago, and there was this great, there's this prison that you can visit, and there was a ton of Vietnamese refugees that were floating on boats. There was a really derogatory name, I guess, for them. I can't remember what the name was, my bad. But yeah, like Vietnamese people escaping the conflict and moving to Hong Kong, and obviously Hong Kong did not have a good view of the Vietnamese. Now that happened everywhere. Obviously, a lot of people from South Vietnam went to Southern California, but there was a ton of refugees, all of them from Laos and Cambodia. They didn't just go to the U.S. or Hong Kong. I'm just randomly mentioning Hong Kong, but I went to Australia as well. I live in a place with the biggest Cambodia town in all of the U.S., I think all of the world, and that's Long Beach, where I used to live there. And so I learned a lot about Cambodian people as well, because obviously the horrific Cambodian genocide is directly related to this Vietnam War right here. I think that's why I'm so locked into this topic, because of how much I can see it physically in my everyday. Why I grew up around so many Vietnamese and Cambodian people. So Martin Luther King. So at 64, as you can see, we're still just seeing the South Vietnamese here. But keep in mind these flags that are associated, because there's going to be more than just the U.S. that shows up. Trust me. Oh, well, actually, we have the U.S. in Thailand currently. Now, remember, Thailand is a first world country. Believe it or not, Thailand's a first world. Look it up. Thailand's a first world country because Thailand directly supported the U.S. immediately into the Cold War. And, you know, I mean, that's typically how it goes when it comes to monarchies. Monarchies definitely didn't support communism, and they were definitely going to be a lot more aligned to the U.S. And the U.S. was just like down for everybody that wasn't communist. It didn't matter if you were a crazy authoritarian dictator, as long as you weren't communist at the time, the U.S. was going to be chill with you. That's how terrified they were of communism. But yeah, so Thailand becomes a key part of the Vietnam War. So do the Philippines, because obviously the U.S. needs bases in the region, safe areas. I was learning about how Thailand became such a vacation hotspot. Apparently, when veterans of the Vietnam War, or when soldiers needed a break, American soldiers needed a break from the Vietnam War, if they were given, like, obviously some time off, you can choose to go anywhere. A lot of the soldiers, American soldiers, when they had a break, they would just go to Bangkok because it wasn't that far away. And that's what really began a big spike in Thai tourism. That's why Bangkok is so big. That's why Thailand is so popular for its tourism. I mean, that's what started it. There's a lot of other factors, but that was a big thing. I mean, the soldiers was like, well, I mean, Bangkok's right there. I don't want to be on a huge flight to Australia or something like that. And some of the soldiers still wanted to be close enough to the front lines so they could, you know, protect their buddies or whatever that is. So here you go. I mean, you literally see American forces all throughout Bangkok, and this is their first view of it. Okay, so South Korea has just joined. Now, I was waiting for that flag to join in. South Korea looks at this conflict and sees themselves, because it's the exact same thing. It is the exact same thing. South Korea being the U.S. aligned force, and the North being communist. It's the same thing, except they're not on a peninsula. And funny enough, that's going to be the demise. That is going to be a very big reason why the South Koreans will not even get a stalemate like South Korea got. You know what I mean? Because the war, we don't know who won the Korean War. It's still going on, technically. At the very least, like, well, hey, the North Koreans, the communist Koreans, didn't take over the entire peninsula. So South Korea sees themselves in South Vietnam here, and sadly, that is not going to be the case. But the South Koreans send over a lot of forces. The Australians also back us up in the Vietnam War, because the Australians love to back us up in literally any war. You gotta love that. So it's 65. Things are starting to really heat up. And look at all this additional support from Chinese forces, from the Soviets. A ton of equipment is being sent down in 1965. I mean, this is the pinpoint. See, I mean, I know that we talked about the domino effect and how flawed that was, the theory that, like, if one communist station falls, then the entire region will fall. Were they wrong with that theory, though? Not really. I mean, Vietnam fell, then Laos fell, then Cambodia fell. However, there's something to be said about, like, well, would those nations have fallen if we didn't cause so much chaos in the region? Maybe still, but it's really hard to say. It's really hard to say. I mean, you got to admit there's a little bit of blame you need to put on at least a little bit of blame you need to put on the Americans for the Khmer Rouge coming up in Cambodia. They deserve some of it. But yeah, I mean, the domino effect, I don't know. It's hard to say. Was it wrong? I don't know. It seems like they were kind of onto something, because look, you see the Soviet Union, the first nation to become communist. Then the Chinese Civil War happens, and then boom, China becomes communist. Then the Korean Civil War happens literally right after that, and they luckily stalemated it. Now Vietnam is next. Like, the thinking at the time actually made quite a bit of sense. And those are all countries that border each other, mind you. Those are all communist countries that border each other. There's tons of communist countries that became communist that did not border each other, like Cuba, for instance, that was on the other side of the world. So here's why I mentioned the fact that Vietnam is not a peninsula would be their downfall, is because of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, I believe is what they call this. So obviously, here's the thing, Vietnam does not follow the arbitrary borders of that were drawn by, I don't know, Western powers or whatever like that. Remember, actually, that Vietnam was literally associated with Laos and Cambodia not even that much earlier, because it was all under French Indochina just a couple decades earlier. So this is the problem now, because obviously in a peninsula sort of situation, the U.S. has the world's biggest navy by far. The communist world does not have a very big navy. Even to this day, the communists have never been able to build boats. I don't really know what's up with that. They're not big boat people. Obviously, the U.S. also have massive, complete superiority, basically, over the air as well. The issue is the boots on the ground. And because Vietnam is not actually a peninsula, well, this is what's going to happen. They're going to use the territory to get closer and closer to Saigon, and now the front line has been extended by hundreds and hundreds of miles. And more forces continue to come down. And pretty soon here, I was just learning about how Nixon was watching a film that a film convinced him to invade Cambodia. My bad. To actually bomb Cambodia. What was that? I just watched that video. But it was talking about all the U.S. presidents and their favorite movies. And there was a lot of arguments that Nixon was watching this movie. Was it Patton? Was it the film Patton? Anyways, people say that movie was the thing that said, next day, he's like, all right, we're going to bomb Cambodia. Because the Cambodians, obviously because that's what the Vietnamese were using here. So here's the Khmer Rouge that's rising up, if I remember correctly. I can't really see what that flag is. What else is going on in 1967? Very soon, the Six-Day War between Israel and basically all of their neighbors. Just wanted to remind people of that massive Cold War event. Here's Speak of Mao, as the political report made by Comrade Lin Bao. Yeah, he's got it. It's funny because you don't even, just looking at Mao, even today, he has got that cult of personality. You can really see it. You could see it in him. The man got swag. The man's got aura. You gotta admit. I mean, yeah, the man accidentally slimed millions of people in his nation. But you know what? He did. Great leap forward. Great idea. But, yeah, he slimed a bunch of people in his nation. But dude had aura. And apparently that's all it takes. Oh, I've not even been looking at the strength numbers. So South Vietnam still have more numbers than North Vietnam. But they've just still taken way more casualties. Look how crazy this is. So now, the front line's been heavily extended. I believe personally, if Vietnam is a peninsula, they do not win this war. Even if it's on the other side of the world. And I don't even think that many people would disagree with that. I don't know if... I think there would only be a handful. I think the majority of people would agree that if you sank Cambodia and Laos literally into the ocean, then North Vietnam and the communists do not win the Vietnam War. It's this, and then actually the same thing that happened in the Korean Peninsula, I believe. But it's hard to say. Here's more. So we got South Korean flags still. There are Thai flags also helping. You got to keep in mind something that's happened between Thailand's history and Laos is Thailand literally sees a lot of these Laotian lands, Laos itself, as theirs. They gave up Laotian lands to the French for appeasement reasons, which, you know what, was just probably a smart idea ultimately, because look, Thailand is one of the only nations in the world to never be colonized. So they played a pretty great diplomatic game. They got a little lucky just by the placement of where they were, but they also had to play the right game diplomatically, so that was nice. Yeah, here's some Thai forces right here moving in. Here's the... I don't know exactly who this South Vietnamese man is, the leader.
What kind of victory?
He speaks pretty good English, though.
Is it a victory for you, Mr. President? Oh, sure. Because
so it's 69. Already by this point, things are ramping down. There's already people... Well, first of all, the year of protest was 1968. The Tet offensive is 67 or 69. I can't even remember, but... Oh, I think it's already happened. But yeah, the Tet offensive, massive offensive right here that the North push into. But already at this point, they're trying to tamper down. And I believe by 1972, the Americans are already out of South Vietnam. And they're, the whole policy is just like, they'll be fine. They'll be able to handle it themselves. And come on. They knew what they were doing. They knew once they left, it was over for South Vietnam. I want to listen to what this guy is saying. Yeah. There's going to be a massive... Oh, boy. There goes Cambodia. Oh, here's a nice big push in 1970. Bro, after this point, you've got to be... The American public has got to be sick of it. I mean, especially because of how many casualties. I think 100,000, almost 100,000 Americans lost their life in this war. And the war was going on for a couple of years. It's got to be... What a terrible... It's tough. And it's also just very different from... The mind of the public was very different in 1950 during the Korean War versus 1970. Or just 15 years later, starting in like 65. Like, the public was just facing a completely different mindset. Fun fact, just going to go ahead and just say this. One time I heard my grandpa say that Vietnam... We would have won in Vietnam if it wasn't for the press. I don't know why I just always remember that. I think that was a really funny one. Yeah, the ceasefire was not going to work. Look at Australia try to hold it down for Cambodia. Now the strength's actually declining from both sides. Here's Nixon. Dude, the South Vietnamese took over 1 million extra casualties. That's so crazy. But again, yeah, I mean, they needed those numbers. If you look at, I think South Vietnam probably would have lost one-on-one too. If it was just North Vietnam versus South Vietnam, it looked like it was going to go that way. But it's crazy that even without these outside forces involved, they still lost. I mean, maybe if it was just South Vietnam and all the U.S. and her coalition versus just North Vietnam without any support, okay, maybe they win that, but of course they were going to get some support. A lot of support. Peace with honor. I mean, Nixon at this point sees the writing on the wall. I feel like everyone's got to see the writing. I mean, once, I would say in 69, they probably knew what was going on. They're like, we can't possibly do this. We're losing so much. The American people don't support it. Dang. I mean, even if the press was on our side, I don't know if we win this. This is looking like it's hard to overcome this really, really bad situation here. This moment in Washington and Hanoi. But you got to think about, in World War II, we all knew the war, a lot of the generals knew the war was over by the end of 1943. Which was 2 years before World War II ends. So I'm thinking in this situation, like, they knew by 1970, like, bro, we just got to get the hell out of here. We got to figure out a plan to get people out. On behalf of the United States and Special Advisor South Korea is still there. Here we go. Last chopper out of Nam. We still have a while before the last chopper is out of Nam. Oh, actually, yeah, I think that's happening right now. Never mind. What am I talking about? The last American choppers, I was thinking, like, when does Saigon actually fall? That's 75. I guess those are actually the last choppers out of Nam. But American troops are gone. Australia is continuing to fight. I mean, to be fair for Australia, this is Australia's backyard, baby. I mean, this is not that far away from Australia, so I can see why they're fighting a bit more. Did all the South Koreans leave? I don't see any South Korean flag either. Remember that, too. Keep in mind, this is not a South Korea that is the current 13th biggest economy in the world, 13th or 14th biggest economy in the world. This is not a Korea that has tons of influence all over the world with K-pop demon hunters. Literally 15 years before 1965, South Korea was one of the poorest places on Earth, because they had literally been, they've dealt with, obviously, Japanese occupation and then the Korean War. South Korea was just devastated. So they weren't this really powerful country yet. We should have somehow got the Japanese imperialists back out there. Look how fast they fall. Look how fast this is. Just a complete collapse. And what's crazy about all this is after this map doesn't show. I kind of wish they continued to focus on this region afterwards. But then the Vietnamese were going to be fighting the Chinese briefly. Then the Vietnamese would have to go fight the Khmer Rouge. So it's a completely very messy situation. And now, fast forward, just like, 5 years later? Or almost 5 years later, we are going to force the Soviets to deal with their own Vietnam, and we call that Afghanistan. That's literally what was the American policy at the time. We're going to give them their own Vietnam when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and we are going to arm the Mujahideen, which would totally not be a bad idea at all. But, when you've put your mind into this mindset, and you're just like, oh, wow, we want revenge on the Soviets. They helped this guy give us an L. We need to help this other dude give the Soviets an L. Obviously, we were going to arm. It didn't matter. It did not matter. At that point, I think the U.S. government just wanted revenge. They wanted vengeance. They only smelled blood in the water. I think we would have given guns to, I don't even want to say, some horrific regimes at that point, because we just wanted the Soviets to get a big old black eye like they gave us a big old black eye. But anyways, so that's the 80s. Obviously, we win the Cold War. Even though we lose this conflict, it's funny when you look at a map, like things look kind of dire. Like communism is popping up all over the place. But the Soviets really start collapsing. They have a really bad economic time in the 80s. China begins to kind of open up their countries with Deng Xiaoping with the special economic zone, so they start experimenting with capitalism a little bit, and then the Soviets collapse. And nowadays we have a Vietnam that we really like. Vietnam is a very big up-and-coming country too. It's a very fascinating place. They're dragging a lot of tourism, in fact, away from Thailand because so many people are going to Da Nang and now what's now called Ho Chi Minh City. A lot of tourists, a lot of expats like to come here. It's because we moved so much American manufacturing out of China and just one border over into Vietnam. So Vietnam is having a lot of economic success, which is why they really didn't want to get tariffed at all by those Trump tariffs. They were willing to just do whatever, you know what I mean, just to keep up the economic development. But now the U.S. and Vietnam are actually pretty cool with each other, kind of crazy enough. When the skies speak English, the trees must speak Vietnamese. This video right here shows the Cold War wasn't really that cold. That's a very good point. I mean, it was certainly really hot in certain zones. Fun fact, the conflict, U.S. bombed Indochina so extensively that Laos actually became the most bombed nation in history. Yeah, still to this day, they were so thoroughly bombed that only 1% of bombs that didn't actively have been discovered today. So thoroughly bombed that only 1% of the bombs that didn't activate have been discovered. Yeah, Laos and Bosnia are both riddled with explosive devices all throughout the land. The United States dropped an estimated 7.5 million tons of bombs in Vietnam. I mean, yeah, it was not a good idea, but now you see what they were seeing. It's like, I mean, I'm not saying that they should have done that, but facing what they were facing, and if your mindset is just to win the war in Vietnam, they were very desperate. I mean, no wonder they were using Agent Orange and all these horrible things, because they were fighting the odds, just unachievable odds, just with North Vietnam and China and the Soviets. Like, that is rough. This was just how effective guerrilla warfare truly is, even in the 60s, even in kind of more modern times. Guerrilla warfare still is very, very strong. This war changed the perspective of American dominance, even if it was for a bit. Yeah, we took, like I said, a black eye. Obviously, America comes out of the Cold War successful, pretty majorly successful. We had a great 1980s and 1990s, I'd say, but this was a very dark moment for America. Then you got to think about the economic stagnation and struggle the U.S. goes through the 70s, and for a brief point there, it looks like America's actually going to lose the Cold War. Whoever have guns, use guns. Whoever have sword, use sword. Whoever don't have sword and guns, use hammer. What? I've never actually heard that before. But Maps in a Nutshell, one of my favorite channels here on all of YouTube. Big thanks to my patrons this month. The Jewish Autonomous Oblast only has 0.6% of Jewish population left. It's pronounced Tour de Sillas, Drew. Whitegrape of the Pirates. Samuel Walker. LoreTrack. William. Scientific Soulist. Nolan. NordTyrol. Miglu the Goat. KingBearHaze. Connor Pavlik. Fredrik Tibblin. Never change, Drew, unless you want to. LuxembourgLover.